Hey everyone, welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're unpacking a seriously fascinating phenomenon about human behavior and group dynamics. But before we get into the heavy analysis, I actually want you to just completely slow down your pace for a second. Imagine a group of musicians playing together in a dimly lit room. There's no conductor waving a baton, no one stepping up to a mic to announce what's going to happen next. There's absolutely zero signal, no handoff, no verbal instruction at all. They're just playing. Flowing together without a set leader or assigned roles, completely immersed in the moment.
Then, right out of nowhere, a tentative phrase begins. It's really small at first, just a few notes that don't abruptly interrupt the rhythm of the group, but they don't exactly sit safely inside it either. It's this subtle deviation, kind of a question raised in the form of a melody, just testing the waters to see what happens next.
And this brilliantly illustrates what happens next. The other musicians don't stop, but they start making these incredible micro-adjustments. First, the drummer softens their beat, intuitively pulling back. Then, the bass holds a steady, grounding line to keep the foundation. And finally, the piano actively leaves space where it didn't before. Not a single word was spoken. Not a single role was explicitly assigned by anyone. But the music spontaneously organizes itself around that one new line. Without anyone assigning the solo, attention found a focus, and the entire group just followed.
Which brings us to the unspoken shift, and where leadership actually starts.
Okay, let's dive into this. What we just looked at with the musicians is basically a profound blueprint for how we humans interact in almost any environment. It all boils down to one core concept. Attention finds a focus, and everything else follows. Let's take this out of the jazz club and put it into a scenario you've probably lived through. Picture a typical meeting room. A plan has just failed or a major project completely tanked. The agenda you walked in with no longer fits reality. The room slows down. It doesn't stop completely. People are still physically sitting there. But someone shifts awkwardly in their chair. Another looks down at their notebook, totally avoiding eye contact. A third person opens their mouth to speak, then reconsiders and stops. The conversation just stalls out. It literally just waits.
And that tension is the catalyst of uncertainty, which is all about finding direction.
In that tense, quiet void, people are desperate to find a steer. Without any formal announcement, something in the room shifts. People begin to subtly look in the exact same direction. One person turns slightly toward a coworker. Another follows their gaze. A few more choose to wait instead of speaking, just watching to see how that specific person reacts. This tense moment of uncertainty is exactly where spontaneous leadership is born, because the group is collectively, silently watching for what is safe and expected. Which brings us to a massive distinction: claimed authority versus granted permission. Claimed authority, that's your job title. It's the org chart. It's the posted authority that says you're the boss. But what we're talking about today is granted permission. Nothing formal changed in that quiet room, but because the group subconsciously began to look to someone for the next move, permission to lead was organically granted.
I want to share a quote directly from our source material here, because it perfectly bridges those visceral feelings with the structural reality of group dynamics. When nobody knows the next move, attention finds a focus fast, then direction follows whether anyone planned it or not. That speed is absolutely crucial. As a group, we just cannot tolerate the vacuum of uncertainty for very long. Direction is going to materialize, whether anyone actually planned it or not.
So let's see how the pattern unfolds through these forces of alignment.
How exactly does this happen? Let's move from the narrative to the analytical. We're going to break down the blueprint of spontaneous leadership and the specific forces that push a group from total uncertainty into organized action. There are 4 environmental forces at play here. First up, people want to steer. When things are unclear, human nature just craves a guiding direction. Second, silence pushes action. The sheer discomfort of a stalled room practically forces someone to make a move. Third, early signals weigh extra. The very first person to react or to confidently break the silence holds a disproportionate amount of gravity. And finally, leadership shows up unplanned. Because of all these intense, compounding pressures, a leader emerges without any formal process ever naming them. So the crucial point is defining what we are actually observing here. Spontaneous leadership is when attention settles on one person and others start lining up their behavior with that person's actions, tone, or timing. Notice that definition says nothing about intention. This is entirely unintentional. The person being looked at might not even realize it at first, or they might just feel it as a pause that lasts a little too long, or a weird sense that the whole room is collectively holding its breath, waiting for them to do something.
Now, what's really interesting about this next concept is the influence feedback loop and how locking in authority actually works.
How do we transition from a fleeting, unspoken moment into something permanent?
Well, welcome to the influence feedback loop. This is the mechanism where organic alignment turns into undeniable authority. Let's map out this self-reinforcing cycle. Step 1. Attention feeds influence. Because the group is looking at you, your responses start moving the conversation. Your reactions instantly shape what feels possible. Step 2. Influence feeds attention. As you set the direction, what you do is seen and repeated by the group, which just draws even more eyes to you. And finally, Step 3. Authority locks in. The influence grows incredibly fast. The person everyone looks to becomes virtually impossible to ignore, completely regardless of whether they hold a formal title.
This brings us to a foundational rule of group dynamics. Influence begins as permission others give, not as authority someone posts. That feedback loop we just mapped out, it only works, it only spins up and locks in because the group organically gave it life. They granted the permission. And once it's given, it builds, it compounds, and it relentlessly drives the whole group forward.
But we also have to look at when attention drifts and the real cost of failure.
Because, we have to look at the flip side. What happens when this process breaks down? Seriously, what happens when attention fails to find a focus? Not every room successfully navigates the unknown. Sometimes, the silence just extends. The awkwardness stretches. People look around waiting for a steer, but nobody offers that early signal. Nobody steps up to provide a safe harbor for the group.
When nothing pulls the group together, the consequences hit fast. Conversations drift aimlessly. There's no anchor to keep the dialogue productive. Because of that, decisions completely stall out. The original agenda is dead, but no new path is forged to replace it, and ultimately, energy disperses. The collective momentum of the group evaporates into sheer frustration and disengagement. The moment extends without a steer, and the opportunity for progress is entirely lost.
This all brings us to a really profound realization. Leadership begins in uncertainty. We always kind of think we need to have everything figured out to be a leader, right? Like absolute certainty is a prerequisite. But it's actually the exact opposite. Certainty is the result of someone stepping into the void. True leadership is born in those messy, unstructured, perfectly quiet moments when the plan has failed and the next steps are completely unknown.
I want to leave you with a final thought to carry with you. Next time the room goes quiet, next time the plan falls apart and everyone starts shifting awkwardly in their chairs, will you notice who the attention settles on? Will you see that unspoken shift happen in real time? Or, perhaps more importantly, will it be you? Keep your eyes open for this dynamic, guys. It's happening in every room you enter. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and keep learning out there.